Hi besties, I am Zuriyata Bashan Lashari with Core Venta. Today we should discuss about the
Their power came less from unity than from competition, less from love than from the relentless push to prove who is stronger, and this dynamic reached a boiling point when whispers emerged of major disagreements about future career directions, with Ryan allegedly pressuring Blake to take a more traditional Hollywood path that aligned with their brand while Blake resisted, wanting instead to step into more experimental, risky creative spaces, and the tension from these disputes spilled into their public lives. Fans noticing subtle changes in their chemistry, the less frequent joint appearances, the guarded body language, the sense that something invisible yet undeniable had shifted, and though their PR teams worked tirelessly to cover these cracks, even staging interviews and orchestrating viral social media posts to reassure fans, the truth was already visible to those who cared to look. Their love story had transformed into a battlefield of egos, and as this realization spread, Hollywood itself couldn't stay silent. Gossip magazines openly speculating that the couple who once mocked others for taking themselves too seriously were now the ones most ensnared in the seriousness of their own image, and the untold truth became unavoidable, that their marriage was no longer sustained by affection alone but by the very rivalry that was supposed to be playful, that the competition to outshine one another had replaced the intimacy that once defined them, and perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was that in trying so hard to control the story, they had lost control of themselves, becoming characters in a narrative dictated not by love but by the demands of fame, power, and perception. And so the real truth that no one had dared to tell was finally clear. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, once the epitome of Hollywood romance, had allowed the very machinery of celebrity to turn their fairy tale into a rivalry, their marriage into a performance, and their love into collateral. By the time the rivalry between Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds had matured into a defining feature of their marriage, what once appeared to be a playful dynamic had hardened into an unspoken competition that dictated nearly every move they made, both privately and publicly, because while the world still clung to the illusion of their perfect love story, those closest to the couple understood that the truth was far more complicated, that behind the laughter, the birthday jokes, and the hand-red carpet walks existed two powerful individuals unwilling to surrender their place in the spotlight, each fighting not only for Hollywood dominance, but also for the narrative of who truly held control in their marriage. And by this stage, the rivalry was no longer simply about career achievements or media attention, but about legacy, because Ryan, now firmly entrenched as a mogul with businesses spanning film, sports, and tech, was determined to be remembered not as just another actor but as a cultural force, while Blake, increasingly empowered by her alliances with Taylor Swift, Selena Gomez, and other influential voices, sought to be recognized as a trailblazer for women in Hollywood, someone who could transform her image from actress into director, producer, and cultural icon, and this clash of legacies put them on a collision course. For every time Ryan pulled off a viral stunt with Wrexham or a new Deadpool teaser, Blake countered with bold public appearances and projects that asserted her independence, signaling that she refused to be sidelined. And as these moves played out on the global stage, Hollywood itself became complicit in the rivalry, with media outlets and insiders fanning the flames by pitting them against each other, publishing side-by-side comparisons of their net worth, their projects, their influence, turning their marriage into a scoreboard that no amount of PR spin could erase. And the irony was that while fans celebrated them as a power couple, each unwilling to be eclipsed by the other, and as the tabloids grew bolder, with speculative headlines about Blake's friendship with Taylor fueling rumors of her growing distance from Ryan, or whispers that Ryan's business focus left little time for his marriage, Hollywood insiders began to question not whether Blake and Ryan were still in love, but whether love had become secondary to the rivalry. A rivalry that was no longer just about careers, but about identity, legacy, and power. And as these questions mounted, the couple's silence only fueled curiosity, because in a culture where celebrities thrive on constant oversharing, Blake and Ryan's refusal to fully address rumors created a vacuum the media was eager to fill, and thus their once perfect love story had now become Hollywood's most fascinating mystery. A tale of how two people who seemed destined for forever had instead become locked in a quiet battle no one wanted to admit, a battle that revealed the true cost of building an empire on the foundation of love, only to realize that love itself had become collateral damage in the pursuit of control and recognition, and by this stage, the rivalry was no longer invisible. It was the very essence of their marriage, the untold truth that Hollywood couldn't stop whispering about, but the world had yet to fully see. Another not just in Hollywood achievements, but in the arena of public perception, Blake leaning on her powerful friendships with Taylor Swift and Selena Gomez to strengthen her cultural relevance, attending high-profile events and quietly inserting herself into feminist Hollywood conversations, while Ryan doubled down on his reputation as a savvy businessman and witty showman, ensuring that his name was always trending whether through a Deadpool teaser, a Mint Mobile stunt, or a viral Wrexham football moment. And in this endless seesaw of influence, even their personal lives became ammunition, with Blake's pregnancies turned into headline moments, each one carefully timed to align with her projects or Ryan's releases, giving the impression that even family milestones had become a part of their chessboard rivalry, and the strain this created behind the scenes was immense, as friends close to the couple revealed that arguments often centered not on love or loyalty, but on strategy. Who was getting more press, whose career was being prioritized, who was being overshadowed, and whose projects were being sidelined, and as this dynamic intensified, their children, their friends, and even their fans became pawns in a larger game of narrative warfare, where the goal was not just to be loved but to be recognized as the dominant force in Hollywood's most-watched marriage. And though Blake and Ryan never openly acknowledged this rivalry, it manifested in subtle but powerful ways. From the way Blake's solo red carpet appearances began to dominate headlines to the way Ryan's interviews increasingly emphasized his independence as a businessman rather than a family man, and while outsiders may have viewed this as normal marital evolution, in Hollywood it signaled the beginning of a shift, a transition from power couple to dueling brands, each trying to secure their legacy. By the time Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' love story had matured into its second decade, the carefully polished facade of their perfect Hollywood marriage was beginning to show signs of wear, cracks that no amount of Instagram jokes or red carpet smiles could fully conceal, and while fans still saw them as the golden couple, insiders began to recognize that the rivalry between them had evolved into a subtle but very real power struggle, one that extended far beyond their home into Hollywood. Boardrooms, PR campaigns, and even friendships, because as Ryan's empire expanded with aviation gin commercials, Wrexham football documentaries, and the ongoing global success of Deadpool, Blake became increasingly determined to redefine herself not just as Ryan's glamorous partner, but as a formidable creative voice in her own right. And this determination started to play out in ways the media couldn't entirely ignore, with Blake's bold choices in film, fashion, and business ventures sending the signal that she was no longer content to orbit Ryan's star but intended to shine independently. Yet the problem with this evolution was that it disrupted the carefully curated narrative their PR teams had constructed, the image of a playful, unshakable couple whose love was built on banter and inside jokes. And once the narrative shifted, the tabloids smelled blood. Suddenly, every sarcastic quip or red carpet expression became fodder for speculation, with gossip magazines asking whether Blake's solo projects indicated growing distance or whether Ryan's jokes at her expense were signs of deeper resentment, and the more they insisted they were fine, the louder the whispers grew, until their rivalry was no longer an open secret but a subject of intense analysis, with entertainment commentators debating whether their perfect marriage was really just a branding exercise. And the truth was that both Blake and Ryan had become trapped in their own narrative, forced to constantly outdo one. Creative allies, while Ryan built empires that showcased his entrepreneurial dominance, yet both constantly pretending to the world that everything was perfect, a duality that made their rivalry fascinating because it wasn't destructive in the traditional sense. It was competitive love, each driven by the other's success, each unwilling to admit they were locked in a struggle for recognition, yet each playing into the media's hunger for the next Hollywood crack, a battle of egos disguised as marital bliss. And as the years unfolded, the whispers grew louder, reports surfacing of arguments during shoots, disagreements about parenting decisions, even disputes over which projects to prioritize. And while most of these were buried under carefully managed PR responses, they painted the picture of a couple no longer simply living their love story, but curating it for survival. And as Hollywood turned more ruthless with new stars emerging, streaming platforms reshaping the industry, and traditional celebrity power fading, Ryan and Blake's rivalry intensified because the stakes were higher than ever. For Ryan, relevance meant maintaining his empire and legacy. For Blake, it meant proving she wasn't just an accessory to that empire, but a force of her own. And as these dynamics grew sharper, one couldn't help but see that their marriage had quietly transitioned from partnership to competition. A competition so subtle the world barely noticed, but so fierce it became the foundation of their untold truth. Desperate need to assert her own identity in a world that kept reducing her to Mrs. Reynolds. And as this internal struggle deepened, their public jokes on social media shifted tone, fans laughing at their playful trolling while insiders saw it as veiled frustration. Each sarcastic birthday post or interview jab masking deeper tensions. For example, Ryan joking that Blake runs the show at home, while simultaneously reminding the public that he's the star of a billion-dollar franchise. Or Blake poking fun at Ryan's long working hours while pointedly praising her independence and choices, comments that seemed harmless, but were in fact markers of a deeper contest. And the media, always hungry for cracks in the perfect narrative, began sniffing around, carefully analyzing interviews and appearances for hints of discord, though their PR teams were skilled enough to dismiss rumors before they spiraled. Yet Hollywood insiders whispered about how competitive their marriage had become, with some producers claiming Blake grew frustrated at Ryan overshadowing her at events, and others alleging Ryan grew uncomfortable with Blake's growing closeness to industry power players like Taylor Swift, whose friendship network became Blake's support system outside of Ryan's orbit, giving her a sense of power and relevance that didn't depend on her marriage, because Taylor, Selena Gomez, and others in that circle were women who thrived on female solidarity and who encouraged Blake to step out of Ryan's shadow, fueling her confidence to explore more ambitious projects. And this encouragement only heightened Ryan's insecurities, because for a man who carefully crafted his image as the witty, all-powerful, self-made Hollywood success story, the idea of his wife building a rival network of influence wasn't something he could ignore, and thus what once was love slowly morphed into a chessboard of moves and counter-moves. Blake strategically aligning herself with PR feminist powerhouses. Blake became more strategic, aligning herself with influential figures like Taylor Swift, expanding her influence outside of Ryan's shadow, and slowly building a support base that was independent of her husband's fanfare. And those differences, while invisible to casual fans, were becoming increasingly visible to Hollywood insiders who whispered about Blake's quiet frustration with Ryan's spotlight-hogging ways, a phrase one anonymous source described when noting how Ryan would often redirect interviews meant to highlight Blake's accomplishments toward his own projects, intentionally or subconsciously framing himself as the central figure of their narrative, a dynamic that might sound small but in the competitive world of Hollywood can easily sow the seeds of long-term resentment, especially when every headline, every photograph, and every quote becomes a currency of power. So what began as laughter-filled Instagram posts and charming banter turned into thinly veiled digs, their PR machine working overtime to maintain the illusion of harmony, while the reality was that Blake and Ryan's marriage had quietly shifted from a love story to a chess match, each move calculated, each step deliberate, each project chosen not just for creative passion but for strategic dominance in Hollywood's hierarchy. And while fans continued to call them the perfect couple, the truth no one was willing to admit was that their love was slowly transforming into rivalry, a rivalry so subtle that it went unnoticed by millions, yet so intense that it began to shape every decision, every career choice, and every public move they made, proving once again that in Hollywood, love stories are rarely just about love. They are about power, control, and the untold truths hidden beneath the surface. Glamour. Perfection was more a construction than a reflection of reality, because soon after the vows were exchanged, the media machine kicked in, portraying Blake and Ryan as witty partners who loved poking fun at each other on Twitter, curating an image of playful romance and authenticity that set them apart from other celebrity couples who often drowned in over-serious PR strategies. And for years, that image stuck, cementing them as Hollywood's golden pair, raising 4 daughters together, attending events side by side, starring in commercials, and even being praised for supporting each other's careers, with Ryan often speaking glowingly of Blake's taste and insight in his scripts, and Blake returning the favor by crediting Ryan for being a wonderful father. But what fans didn't know was that this carefully constructed, perfect marriage was also a battlefield of subtle competition, because Ryan, already an A-list actor with Deadpool becoming his career-defining hit, carried with him the weight of a carefully honed career resurgence, while Blake, though deeply talented, was often overshadowed by his success, choosing to step back from acting after The Shallows, Age of Adeline, and A Simple Favor, instead channeling her creativity into business, lifestyle branding, and eventually directing, which created an imbalance that the media often amplified by placing Ryan on a higher pedestal while labeling Blake as the wife of Ryan Reynolds, a role she never intended to settle for. And as years passed, the small differences began to manifest into rivalry, sometimes playfully, sometimes bitterly, their social media jokes evolving from harmless teases into pointed remarks that insiders began noticing, with every award show appearance or interview subtly hinting at their growing need to outshine each other, because while Ryan leaned heavily into humor, sarcasm, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds were once the glittering emblem of Hollywood's most enchanting love story, a couple adored by fans, envied by peers, and showcased by the media as the gold standard of marriage in the entertainment industry. Yet beneath the surface of their picture-perfect smiles, hand-in-hand red carpet appearances, and witty social media banter lay a gradual evolution of love into rivalry. A tale so complex and layered that most people never saw the subtle signs until the cracks began to widen, and while the world embraced them as the ultimate power couple, their reality was far more turbulent, filled with professional competitiveness, hidden resentments, and unspoken conflicts that would slowly transform what once seemed like an eternal romance into an ongoing battle for dominance, influence, and narrative control in Hollywood's unforgiving spotlight. Because at the beginning it had all the makings of a modern-day fairy tale, Ryan coming off a series of relationships that didn't work, including his high-profile marriage to Scarlett Johansson, and Blake rising to fame with Gossip Girl, a television hit that made her a household name and secured her a place among the rising stars of her generation, their paths crossing on the set of Green Lantern, a film that bombed critically and financially, but ironically served as the foundation of their romantic bond. A project the world would soon forget, but one that Ryan and Blake would never be able to erase from their personal timeline as they transitioned from colleagues to friends and eventually lovers, keeping much of their relationship private in the early stages until they finally tied the knot in 2012 in a low-key ceremony in South Carolina, a wedding that was both romantic and controversial due to its plantation venue, sparking discussions the couple later addressed. Yet at that moment it was sold to the world as the beginning of Hollywood's most lovable union, but like all stories wrapped in